When was the first time you felt afraid of making a mistake? I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about that. And more importantly, why were you afraid? Today, I'm going to address the fear of mistakes in a new light. Why we fear them, how we feared them throughout history, and how illogical our fear truly is. And in doing this, I'm going to show you my favorite trick: changing your perspective or switching out the camera lens. So, to begin, I'm going to address the fear of mistakes through 3 different perspectives. Why? Well, more perspectives allows us to deal with more situations. We'll be more productive. So, to begin, let's look at this with a global and conceptual perspective, the widest scale we have, or the biggest possible camera lens. Next, a more scientific and specific perspective, looking at patterns and how innovation is linked to mistakes. And finally, we'll use a magnifying lens to look at our personal mistakes and our fears and how to change them. So, starting conceptual, where does our fear come from? Well, humans are productive creatures, meaning we like to get things done and get them done well, even on our worst days. But being the mildly pessimistic species that we are, we would assume that we're going to mess up eventually. What does that mean? Well, messing up means that we'll have to stop doing things. We won't be as productive. Or at least that's what we've been led to believe. When in fact, history tells a very different story. Throughout history, we can see mistakes linked to creation, to innovation, and to progress. So, let's give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. An example. In 48 BCE, the Library of Alexandria burnt down, almost 2,000 years ago. Pretty big mistake, right? Well, quickly, how could the loss of so much knowledge be a good thing? How could the destruction of generations' worth of information lead to anything positive? Well, let's take a look. First and foremost, people were probably a bit more careful around fire. But let's look deeper. The loss of so much knowledge encouraged future research, looking to gain back not lost knowledge, and through that, new information. Additionally, people valued knowledge more after seeing how easily it could be lost. And now that there was no metaphorical hotspot of information and history in the ancient world, knowledge was allowed to spread out. As people searched for the forgotten bits of Alexandria, knowledge was decentralized over the whole world. Additionally, of course, the fire encouraged innovation of record keeping and made sure that new intellectual ideas circulated. So, what am I saying? I'm saying that the butterfly wings of tragedy led to good. So, now that we understand our fear, and we can see that it lacks reason, we can now state with confidence, fear of mistakes is illogical because yes, what we fear is bad, and yet it leads to good. So, Let's give you another example. Let's scale down and bring in humanity's best friend, science. So, in 1999, a while ago, the Mars Climate Orbiter was lost during orbital insertion. What does that mean? Basically, when NASA was calculating how far it would take for the orbiter to land on the surface of Mars, they put in not just the wrong number, but the wrong unit system. So, because of this tiny mistake, NASA lost just over $500 million and countless hours of work. So, pretty big mistake. But, respectfully, how could losing what was quite literally a walking, flying, scientific innovation lead to anything good? Again, let's take a look. First and foremost, no one ever made that mistake again. But, in all seriousness, NASA's internal review process became much more strenuous and made it safer for future astronauts. Think of the money that NASA might have lost versus the money that NASA would have lost. So, not a setback for long. This mistake catapulted NASA back to the stars, literally and figuratively. But, great examples, right? Thank you. But, how does this relate to me? How does this affect me on a personal scale? Well, to answer that question, let's give you one last example. The home run of examples. Me, who's been standing here talking at you guys for the last couple minutes. Well, before writing this speech, I asked several people who know me very well for a mistake that I constantly make. Something that seems to almost define me as a person. And I was told that I am too far in the future. I worry too much about what's gonna happen. Now, however vague and grand and relatable this mistake may sound, it's affected my life in very concrete ways. So, to give you an idea of how it's changed my life, let's put on a pair of lenses that allows me to see back to my memories, Christmas break, 2024/25. In the weeks upcoming my exams, I spent the entire time studying. I ignored the places we went on vacation. I ignored my friends. And I ignored my family, some of whom I only saw once a year for Christmas break. Not good. I was missing out in the most literal definition of the word. Missing out. That can't be good, can it? Well, to answer that question, let's change the camera lens one last time. I promise this is the last time. So, let's look at this with rosy-eyed glasses. So, despite the pain and the heartbreak and the crying, I did pass my exams. And I made closer bonds with family members who helped me study and stayed with me. And after almost everyone I knew had banged on my door, begging for me to give them some sign of life, I realized something that was quite possibly more important. I realized how much they cared. So, what am I saying? Of course you shouldn't stick your heads in the clouds and worry about what's going to happen. You should also not feel ashamed for being afraid of a mistake. Fear is a natural emotion and one that has kept us alive for many thousands of years. But when we let fear take control over our actions, we lose learning and growth. So, what I want all of you to take away from this experience today is the power that each and every one of you has. Perhaps not to prevent mistakes, but to change your perspective, to switch out the camera lens. By taking control back from fear, we can see the good in the bad. We can understand the learning and growth we are being given. Imagine this. Imagine a test without anxiety. Imagine a conversation without hesitation. Imagine something new without anxiety. Imagine a life where you do not live in fear. Imagine a life where you are not afraid of mistakes. What would that be like?